Hi, and welcome to the Debrief. I'm Donna King, Editor-in-Chief of Carolina Journal. We've got a lot to cover this week. Joining us, we're going to be talking to Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation, and we're going to be talking about redistricting with Andy Jackson, also from the John Locke Foundation, and of course, David Larson, Carolina Journal's managing editor. There's a lot going on this week. We're really talking about political brinksmanship from Washington to Raleigh. We see Capitol Hill has let the government go into shutdown. Governor Stein is threatening Medicaid reimbursements at home. We're also going to look at the redistricting ruling that was big this week coming out, and Duke Energy's new plan for restructuring could restructure North Carolina's energy future. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's talk first about this, Congress to Raleigh brinkmanship. We're seeing it in both places. Mitch, the federal shutdown, do you think this is really about the budget itself? Is this about a political back and forth game? It's really capturing attention across the country.
Well, it is to some extent about
Sure.
the budget because there are disagreements about what to do with the budget. But largely, when you have these government shutdowns, it's basically politics. One side thinks that they'll get an advantage by allowing the government to shut down, at least parts of it. Now, of course, anytime there's a federal government shutdown, it's not the whole government. It's not as if there's going to be looting in the streets
Sure.
and prisoners running free. Basically, some parts of the government have to shut down. And I think one of the things that's a possible downside for the people who wanted to shut down is that if this goes on long enough, some people will say, well, it really didn't hurt us that much that the government shut down. Why do we need to have it come back? My guess is that there are a lot of people in the crowd that support President Trump who will be arguing that. Will be saying, well, we're trying with DOGE to get rid of much of this government waste. Now that we've seen the shutdown and it hasn't had a huge impact on us, why don't we just get rid of the things that shut down? So that's a danger. But yes, it's largely political. You basically have one side saying, I'm not going to come to the table, and the other side saying, well, you should come to the table. They don't meet. We have this partial government shutdown, and if it lasts only a few days or a couple of weeks, probably won't have a major impact. Mm-hmm. But after a while, there are some things that people want the government to do, and if they aren't able to have those things funded, then there could be some problems.
Yeah, the Republicans could end up getting blamed for this. They own both chambers, but they can't keep the budget moving forward without at least, I think, 7 Democrats coming in.
Right, and remember that one of the arguments that the Democrats have is, hey, Republicans are in charge of everything. They have the White House, they control the Senate, they control the House. But they only kind of control the Senate in the sense that to get anything major done, you have to have some Democratic support because of the filibuster. That, at this point, is something that's a disadvantage for the Republicans. But at other times, when the Democrats have the majority in the Senate, it's an advantage for the Republicans to have that filibuster rule. Sure. So it's going to be something to watch to see whether, once this is all resolved, whether there is any lasting damage. And if there's lasting damage, who gets the blame?
Sure. Now, this doesn't happen in North Carolina over the budget generally. Why is that?
Well, North Carolina passed several years ago, the General Assembly passed the law that basically said, well, if we don't pass a new budget, we're just going to keep going on with
so
the
automatically,
old budget.
they don't have to vote for it.
And they don't have to do that. Now, you could do that at the federal level.
Why not? Why haven't they done that?
Well, they haven't done that because there just hasn't been a will to do that.
Right.
I mean, this isn't actually a budget. This is actually an extension of the debt. It's increasing the debt ceiling. So this is a separate fight from the budget fight.
Right.
And so there have been calls to get rid of this and essentially write in the debt ceiling into the budget, and then you wouldn't have this kind of drama occurring. And it's happened in just about every administration going back at least to Jimmy Carter.
Sure.
So they can do it, but is there a will to get rid of that tool for disruption that some parties like to have?
Sure. I mean, we're seeing a little bit of an impasse here in North Carolina over Medicaid. Do you see some parallels there between what's happening on Capitol Hill and what's happening here in Raleigh?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. Is there are the reason the federal government can't really keep from going above. There's a lot of sort of big, unpredictable trains that are rolling, and they bash through barriers. Medicaid being
huge.
One of them, where it goes above and beyond what it's projected every time, and there's a lot of people relying on it. So that's one of the big fights they're having is, Trump in the one big beautiful bill, and in general they're trying to maybe add some work requirements and make sure whoever's on there, they verify that they're eligible. And here in North Carolina, a lot of the fight you're seeing now is on rebasing Medicaid, and making sure okay, well, we thought it was going to cost this, but it's actually going to cost much more than that, and they even dispute maybe what that number is. I think Stein and the DHHS were more saying like 300 something million, and then the Fiscal Research Division and the legislative leaders say 100 something million. But you know, it's not really predictable. I think the main issue is that it keeps, especially in North Carolina, we have about 40% of our state budget that is Medicaid. A lot of the surrounding states, it's only 25%. They're able to find ways to make it more affordable. So I think that's something that maybe just for long-term stability, North Carolina should really pay more attention to.
Sure, and this rebase, like David was saying, is not really about spending more. It's about saying this is what it actually costs and this is what we had planned, and the two chambers, House and Senate, can't agree on what that number ultimately looks like. But do they have enough funding to get through, June, get through the fiscal year? And are there tactics, tools, administrative tools at the executive branch's disposal? Or do you think that this October 1st deadline that Stein has set for reimbursements is hard and fast?
Well, the October 1st deadline was something that was set by the executive branch, saying if you don't have a deal, we're going to have to do this. They could make changes. And one of the things that we heard from Speaker Destin Hall was that there's nothing that's written in stone about this October 1st. It could be delayed. Now, on the side of the governor, I think the valid argument is, well, if you're not going to fund this, we shouldn't be spending as much as we are now for these reimbursements, not knowing if you're ever going to come to a deal, because if you don't come to a deal, the bill is going to be much larger later and it's going to be harder to cover. But it's also partly a political argument that, hey, you aren't dealing with Medicaid, we've got to cut rates to reimbursements, it's going to cause all these problems for people who deal with Medicaid, so blame Republicans. So, I mean, it is partly politics, it is partly the actual math of what happens. To me, probably the biggest point on this whole debate is that the Republican legislators don't seem to be looking at this as some serious, dire situation. If they did, they would have come to an agreement on this. They would have taken out anything else other than Medicaid and just passed a bill saying we're going to spend X amount more for the Medicaid rebase and be done with it. We saw them do that with relief for hurricanes. We saw them do that on the mini budgets that they've been able to reach, where they say, regardless of our other disagreements, we're going to come together on this. We all agree, let's pass it and move on. Because the Senate put the funding for the Children's Hospital in its Medicaid bill, the House didn't want that, wanted something different. The fact that they did not come to an agreement shows to me that they don't see this, at least at this point, as something that's going to have dire consequences if it doesn't get done.
All right, we're going to be watching that really closely. Another big thing that came down this week, a federal judge has upheld the Senate's maps, rejecting the lawsuit's claims of racial gerrymandering. Mitch, what did Judge Deaver say about this case, and give us some background on it?
Well, this is one of 4 active lawsuits dealing with North Carolina's legislative and/or congressional districts. And this one in particular dealt with 2 state Senate districts in northeastern North Carolina. 2 plaintiffs, both of them black men, one of whom, since this lawsuit was filed, has become a member of the General Assembly, Rodney Pierce. They filed suit saying that the 2 state Senate districts were examples of racial gerrymandering because northeastern North Carolina is an area that has a large black population, and that neither of these districts was drawn to be a majority-minority district, meaning that minorities would make up the majority of the voters in that district. The General Assembly responded, look, we followed all the redistricting rules. There's no reason for us to have drawn a majority-minority district. And a trial was held in this case in February, and now months later, Judge Dever came out with his 120-plus page ruling that basically said there's no reason for the General Assembly to have had to do this. To draw a district that is based on race is an odious practice, and you would only do it if you absolutely have to. But look at the evidence. Look at all of the African Americans who've been elected to office without having majority districts. North Carolina doesn't have a problem with racially polarized voting of white people blocking black people from voting for the people they want. Look at the leaders in the Democratic caucuses of the House and Senate. All of them are blacks, who live in districts that have a very low percentage of black voters. And so he said there's no reason for this to have been done. Throughout the suit, within a day, the plaintiffs filed their notice of appeal. And my guess is that either from the time they filed this suit, or at least from the time that they knew that Judge James Dever, who is a former Republican redistricting lawyer, from the day that they knew that he was going to get the case, their plan all along was, whatever he says, let's take it to the 4th District, see if the Court of Appeals will go along with our arguments.
All right, let's put some context to this. You've been studying this for a really long time. What do you think that this means in the greater fight over redistricting in North Carolina?
Well, first of all, the interesting thing for me about this case was how exceptionally weak the lawsuit was.
Okay.
When you were even looking, one of the things you have to do in these lawsuits is you have to kind of give demonstration maps so that you could draw maps that would have majority black districts in there.
Okay.
But when you looked at them, all of them had to make race the priority. You had to basically say, I'm going to draw a black district. That's a violation of the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause. I mean, that's been struck down over and over again in court cases. And when Judge Dever did his analysis, they failed almost every factor. The only thing that they said that the plaintiffs proved is that black North Carolinians tend to vote in a block. They didn't show that white North Carolinians vote in a block to defeat them. You know, you have these coalition districts all the time. Blacks are either at or above their proportion of the general population in the North Carolina General Assembly. And so all of these factors that they said, well, we need these districts because there is this discrimination, were found not to be true. And so I really don't expect this is going to get too far on appeal either. And if it ever gets to Supreme Court, I don't think it'll get as far. One thing that this could do, ironically, is provide some cover for what people are saying is going to be an upcoming redistricting fight where you're shifting the 1st district, because you're basically dealing with about half of the 1st district, or maybe a quarter, a third to a quarter of that 1st district, or these 2 Senate districts. And they've demonstrated in this lawsuit that you don't have this kind of race-based voting. And if you do a redraw and the goal is to help another Republican win, you know, the federal courts and the state courts have already established that that is something that is beyond the reach of the justice system. That is a political question. And it's going to be more difficult now that you've had this case for plaintiffs to try to prove, well, this new 1st district is going to be a racial gerrymandering. So yeah, it probably, if anything, has hurt the cause of folks that want to keep the 1st district and Democrat Don Davis, you know, in office and the district the way it is.
Could it set a precedent?
And if Republicans are going to redraw the congressional map to try to get another Republican district, this is the only place they could do it.
Right.
Basically, the other 3 Democratic districts are so solidly Democratic, there'd be no way to get another Republican. The only place you could do it is by making that 1st district more Republican. So as Andy said, this could give fuel to the fire if that idea comes to pass.
Interesting. Could it also head off other potential redistricting lawsuits? It seems like we have one after the other.
Well, circumstances are different in each one.
Sure.
I think that there is some potential. You're looking at a lawsuit going down in Wilmington that has a little bit of an odd-looking notch in it. And those kind of irregularities are things that are signals that, you know, maybe there's something wrong. It's not proof that there's something wrong with the district and it ought to be overturned, but it bears watching. The thing is, if they redraw the 1st again, if I'm going back to that, if they keep the district reasonably compact, they don't split too many counties, they basically make it a regular looking district that happens to benefit Republicans a little more, they're probably in a safe space.
Right. Okay. What about nationally? Could it set a precedent nationally?
Well, we're kind of already there. We had a case in South Carolina that basically said that if your goal is we want more Republicans rather than your goal, we want fewer, you know, black voters being able to elect people that they want. Courts have upheld that. There's kind of this, and there was an Alabama case that went the other way. The reason they did that is because they showed that you could draw a majority black district that was more compact than the district that they had. So we've kind of have this bracket that's established. And so lawmakers can probably follow between those two cases, the South Carolina case and the Alabama case, and kind of find their safe space.
Okay. Okay, but you can't just draw maps because you want to. I mean, there's certain criteria that has to happen. The census, something like that. Is that correct? You can't just do it because you would like to see it different.
Well, in North Carolina, you cannot do mid-decade redistricting for House districts and state Senate districts.
Okay.
There is no such restriction for congressional districts. So they could draw them every 2 years if they wanted to.
Wow.
They could draw them every year if they wanted to.
I
Of
thought
course,
it
would-
had to be
we
around
only-
the census.
No, that is the rule, as Andy just said. That is the rule for legislative districts.
Okay.
So we see legislative redraws fairly often, but it's always because of court orders and court cases. But if no one ever took any of these things to court, you would only ever see legislative redistricting for state house and state senate once a decade, and then Congress as often as they want.
Wow, wow, that is a surprise, actually. One of the things that we've been talking about a lot is this Duke Energy plan. This is something that's been going on for quite some time. House Bill 951, if you're not familiar with it, set some caps on and some deadlines on when they wanted to move carbon neutral. That midterm cap has been lifted 2030, right? This new plan, Duke Energy came out with a new plan this week that said that they're going to really ramp up some nuclear and natural gas, extend some coal, and kind of take wind off the table. Tell us a little bit about what Duke Energy is saying they're going to do with the plan moving forward.
Well, sure. So this is what's called the Carolinas Resource Plan, and it's something that Duke has to do every couple of years as part of legislation and being a regulated utility. It has to come up with this plan saying what is going to be its mix of energy sources. And there are various laws and goals that dictate what you're supposed to do. You have to deal with affordability and reliability, but also these other things of trying to get more renewables in the mix and trying to reduce emissions. You mentioned that the previous legislation said we want carbon neutrality by 2050. And then there was also this interim goal of trying to get a 70% reduction by 2030. So the General Assembly passed the Power Bill Reduction Act over Governor Josh Stein's veto this year that got rid of that 2030 goal. And so this is Duke's first 2-year plan since that bill happened. And basically what Duke said in its press release was, well, because of changes in the state law and the federal law, because changes happened from the Biden administration to the Trump administration, here's how we're changing our mix of how we would go about meeting the demand. 1 was more nuclear, 2 was more natural gas, 3 was extending coal. There's a goal of getting rid of coal-fired power plants because coal tends to be the most productive of carbon dioxide emissions. But still, they say with the changes in law, we would like to extend by 2 or 4 years some of our coal plants that can be used with more than just coal. So basically, we'll extend it with coal, and if we have to switch it over to natural gas, we'll do that. But they're going to do that. They didn't really change anything on solar. There's a lot of solar that's supposed to be going into the mix, and they kind of kept that where it is. But then they said, we looked at wind power. Wind power doesn't make sense economically, so we're not going to even plan for any wind power. We'll relook at it again when we do the next plan. But it is a change of the mix, and one of the things that Duke said is this is probably going to be an average annual increase for customers of about 2%, which might not sound all that great, but then they also said, but that's much less than it would have been had we had to stick with the plan that was approved that we came up with a couple of years ago.
Sure. So does this give them more breathing room then to hit those efficiency goals and that kind of thing?
Well, you've got the main thing that's driving this that would change it from being anything other than just nuclear, natural gas, and coal is the idea of cutting the emissions. And you still have that 2050 legislation that says you got to be carbon neutral. So they're still having to move that way, but they do have a little bit more breathing room now that they don't have to meet a 2030 goal. And one of the arguments for passing that Power Bill Reduction Act was that Duke Energy, because Duke, any other providers, but mainly Duke Energy because they're the main provider, they're having to do all of these artificially expensive things to meet this 2030 goal when what you really say you want is the 2050 goal.
Sure.
And so let's not have this 2030 goal that's making things much more expensive than they need to be now, and just push toward the 2050 goal instead.
Sure, sure. Let's talk about that from a policy perspective. It's not easy first to be following these government regulations to try and meet your goal of providing enough energy for all of us and our future. Has this opened their aperture a little bit, given them a little more breathing room?
Well, it does, and Mitch mentioned this. Nuclear is efficient. It's, you don't produce carbon with
Right.
nuclear energy, but the issues is building nuclear power plants takes time. It's a long-term perspective, and so what this really does is opens up the nuclear option more,
Okay.
because you don't have to spend all of your resources building these short-term solutions to meet that 2030 goal.
Sure.
Now you can think more long-term, like how is this going to help us deliver energy as efficiently as possible and still meet that 2050 deadline.
Sure.
And that hasn't been taken off the table. So
Okay.
this is really, giving more flexibility in order to deliver the same needs, but do it in a way where you don't have these artificial constructs.
Sure, sure. And we're states growing like crazy, technology. There's been some alarm bells about whether we're going to be able to meet our energy needs for the future.
Yeah, I think this whole shift that we've had around
Sure.
this has been sort of reality asserting itself,
Yeah,
maybe on
yeah.
the situation where we have these long-term goals that we want to hit, and then
Right.
we'll set this benchmark. That feels good, 70% by 2030, and then just realizing this is probably not going to be doable. Costs are going to go way up, reliability. There's been stress on the grid,
Sure.
especially around big weather events where, okay, now there's a blackout on Christmas Eve, I believe it was.
Yeah, it was.
And you saw when they showed the chart of during that blackout how these different contributing power sources were performing. Nuclear was up at its top and
Yeah.
really very reliable, and some of the other ones, it was at night, so
Sure.
you saw solar wasn't really contributing anything.
It's dark, yeah.
And
No sun.
Right,
it was
shocking.
dark. So just seeing this, okay, we have AI
Yeah.
coming in really big and all these other technologies, and you have people moving to the state like crazy. I think in the report they said that over the last 15 years you had maybe one. Well, I'll put it the other way. In the next 15 years, it's going to be 8 times faster
Wow.
increase in power needs than it has been for the past 15 years. So they're seeing that, and they're like, we're going to really need to ramp up power, and so that's just reality. That your nuclear, natural gas, coal. I was almost surprised to see coal coming back into play.
I
It
was
hasn't been
too.
mentioned a lot, but I mean, there's the ash spill a few decade ago or so, and
Right.
maybe it wasn't fashionable to mention coal, but
Sure.
as sort of a bridge fuel along with natural gas, it can get us to that 2050 it's a reliable source, it's plentiful. So I think, yeah, it's just reality kind of reasserting
is.
itself on what's possible and
Right.
what also the ratepayers are willing to
Yeah.
accept in terms of rate increases. 2% versus what they had said would be much higher, I think seems more
Right.
reasonable.
Right, yeah. One thing before we wrap it up, I wanted to, I forgot it was even this week, we had a hearing in Charlotte on public safety. It drew almost all of North Carolina's congressional delegation down there, some really heartfelt testimony. This was in the wake of the Charlotte light rail murder, and talking about, there was a real interesting divide in the room that it felt like a lot of the victims' families, a lot of the members of Congress were like, this is it. We are drawing a line here. An increase in focus on, mental health and pretrial detention responsibilities. We haven't heard yet from Governor Stein about this. He says he's still studying it. What was your impression of this hearing about where you think people are in this fight for public safety against crime?
Well, part of it is politics. I mean,
Sure.
you don't have to have a congressional hearing in Charlotte. That was
Right.
done by design. Come
Sure.
down where you've had this big national story. People have seen the images. It's terrible, and it makes you think, oh, crime is a
Right.
problem. We need
Right.
to do something about it. But it isn't all politics. There
Sure.
is some policy to it, and I think you're seeing sort of a divide between the people saying, well, let's deal with root causes
Right.
and make sure that we deal with mental health and some of the things that would drive people to lead them to crime, versus the people saying that's important. We do need to address this, but you also need to deal with the crime
Right.
and stop the crime from happening. We don't want to see anyone, whether it's a 23-year-old Ukrainian refugee or
Sure.
anyone being attacked in the way that Irina Zarutska was. And so it's going to be very interesting to see what happens coming out of this, whether Congress gets its act together and does something,
Right.
or whether we see action at the state level, because we know we're going to see whether the Irina's law is finalized and Josh Stein goes along with it. If not, something will happen. Either it
Right.
will get the veto will get overridden, or they'll come up with something else that will be acceptable.
Sure. Congressman Tim Moore has filed a bill that would hold judges, magistrates accountable if somebody goes out and commits a violent crime after being held. What do you think about some of that? And do you feel like we've got some movement on these issues?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. It seems like the magistrates, there's a lot of public attention on, are they making the right calls
Right.
about violent persons in there? And some of Irina's law is going to take away maybe some of the discretion they had and
Sure.
say, in these cases, here's the procedure to follow. One area I thought was pretty interesting on that was around mental health.
Right.
And that if it seems as this person's been involuntarily committed in the last 3 years, I think it was, and maybe if there's been other reason, or if there's another reason to consider their mental health, they have to send them to an ER or somewhere that can give an immediate, diagnosis, and there has to be a determination made if they should have an involuntary commitment. And so it was interesting. I saw there was a panel that had Senator Heiss and Representative Paré and some people out there were discussing maybe capacity issues with involuntary commitment. Like if this is going to be the way it is,
Right.
and we're going to be taking people on the streets that are,
Sure.
we've
Dead
all
space.
seen them in
Yeah.
these big cities, and if we're going to be getting them off the street, involuntarily committing them to some kind of facility, then we have to think about, okay, what are these facilities? Is there going to be enough capacity there?
Right.
Same thing happened in Southport recently, where somebody who had extreme PTSD and psychosis pulls up and shoots
horrific.
into a bar. So yeah, I think there's starting to be some sense of agreement that there's certain people that are a danger to themselves and others. What do we do with them? Maybe the magistrates should have them involuntarily committed, but where do they go from there? So that's a big discussion going forward.
Sure. Andy, what was your thought taken away from all this?
Well, Congresswoman Alma Adams dismissed the hearing in Charlotte as political theater, and I agree with Mitch. It was political theater, but
Right.
it was political
It's also
theater
true, though,
to
yeah.
draw attention
Sure.
to a very serious issue.
She represents that district?
She's central. She's most of Charlotte is
Okay.
her district, and so yes, these are serious problems. They need to be addressed, and I think that what we're going to see, and this is just the first round, Irina's law. You're going to see other things. We really do need better guidelines for magistrates when they're determining, making bond hearings. I was surprised to find out we don't have those.
I was too.
There are some guidelines in different district courts, but we don't have statewide guidelines. And so, these magistrates are essentially, working on the fly with these things. And they might have some precedent they could fall on, but clearly we need to have a procedure where you're keeping people who are dangerous off the street. And if somebody has a mental health issue that causes them to get arrested 14 times, well, that's not really a sign that, maybe we shouldn't get this person off the street. We should certainly get this person off the street. If they need treatment, help them get the treatment, but they shouldn't be in a position where they're going to commit these kind of crimes. I mean, obviously bad for victims, but it's bad for the people doing that if they're not going to get the treatment that they need, so they don't do those kind of things.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We want to know what you think. Please comment below about any of these topics. Duke Energy, crime. We're going to be following all of this on carolinajournal.com and johnlocke.org. So make sure you comment, follow us, and check us next time.